Bahrain India Society, invited guests, good evening, and thank you for joining us for our first program on Zoom. A virus which originated in Wuhan, China, has till date infected over 8 million people globally. And unfortunately, of those, more than 400,000 people are dead. This virus practically locked down the world for a few months and has changed our set of patterns of living, working, and socializing. The entire world is buzzing with uncertainties and questions. How long will this virus last? When will a vaccine be available? What will people's life look like once this pandemic is over? On the economic front, economies of countries are being battered, not to talk about job losses, numbers like which have never been seen before. Closer to home in the Middle East, with a sharp fall in oil prices and the demand, it has been like a double whammy for us here. To talk about the possible post-COVID economic scenario in Bahrain, we have with us this evening Mr. Hassan Jarrar, the CEO of Bahrain Islamic Bank. I have known Hassan for many years as a professional and as a friend. With his vast experience in the field of banking, finance, and his knowledge of the local economies, Hassan will take us all, or he will, let's say, zoom us all into the future of Bahrain post this COVID-19 situation. I will now request Madhavan, our General Secretary, to give a brief introduction of Hassan Jarrar. After that, once his talk is over, there will be a Q&A session. All of you who have any questions, please put your questions on the group chat. And I'm sure Hassan will try his best to answer your queries. Madhavan, can you please introduce our guest this evening?
Thank you, Raj. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are fortunate to have as our speaker tonight one of the most prominent banking leaders in the GCC region with more than 30 years of international, regional, and local banking experience. He has been voted as the best banking CEO in Bahrain 2019 and among the top 50 CEOs in the GCC. His diverse career in banking includes extensive experience in retail, SME, and corporate banking in the Middle East and in the US in key management positions in leading banking institutions. Prior to joining his current position in Bahrain Islamic Bank in 2015, he held the position of Chief Executive Officer of Standard Chartered Bank Bahrain. Prior to that, positions like Head of Corporate and SME Banking at Abu Dhabi Commercial Bank and Head of Corporate Banking at Mashreq Bank Abu Dhabi. He has also worked in the USA in key management positions with Security Pacific Bank and Bank of America. He serves on general board positions including Chairman of Liquidity Management Center, Member of the Board and Chairman of the Audit and Governance Committee of the Bahrain Stock Exchange, Member of the Board of the Bahrain Association of Banks, Member of the Board and Chairman of the Audit Committee of the Bahrain Labour Fund. May I now have the privilege of presenting to you Hassan Jarrar. The floor is all yours, sir.
Thank you very much. The privilege is mine. It's great to be among such a distinguished group, and thank you very much for the invitation and your very, very kind words. Just to pick up where Raj left off, I still have the privilege of my mother, who's 86 years old. She comes to Bahrain to visit, and she came this time, and then a couple of days before she was planning to go back to her house in Jordan, everything closed down. So she's stuck with us here in the house. And one of the challenges that many of us face is situations like this, where you have an elderly parent whose health is frail, and you not only worry about them, God forbid, catching the virus, but other things come up. Is how do you keep them active? How do you keep them motivated? How do you keep them from being bored? How do we have this added burden on, and it's a huge challenge for many of us who have such parents. Anyway, what I was getting at is I was sitting with my 86-year-old mother. I said, Mom, you know, you were a girl in World War II. You lived through the first Palestinian-Israeli war in 1948. And in 1967, you're a refugee. You've been through the plague. You've been through the tuberculosis crisis. And you've been through many others. How does this now compare to any of them? The answer, obviously, she startled. She said, you know, the plague and the TB was confined to a country or a neighborhood or whatever. Unlike this thing here, where she says, everywhere I look, it's affecting everyone and everything. And you know, nothing in the history of mankind has been documented to have reached cross borders to nearly 8 billion people, regardless of status, regardless of economic or race or religion or gender, and so on and so forth. So this thing is really, really different from many other plagues, and it's very different from the financial crisis in the fact that it brings with it fear, and it brings with it anticipation and worry over one's safety and the safety of loved ones as well. Add to that the fact that nothing is documented as having begun to unwind decades of globalization. In the last 30 years, the world has been striving to promote globalization. We've torn down, you know, borders, at least virtual ones. Countries began to cooperate with each other, especially on economics. Supply chains have became very, very effective and very efficient in what we call just-in-time inventory management. And all of a sudden, this thing comes in, and it just completely nullifies globalization and completely nullifies the efficiency of what all of the industrialists are working on in terms of supply chain or just-in-time inventory management. And now we're looking at replacing it with something called, instead of just-in-time, is just-in-case episodes. Obviously, it doesn't help that this virus came maybe a couple of years immediately after the two superpowers began their strife. And what I mean by that is the US and China. You know, the two countries have never been this far apart, and the situation is getting worse. The COVID-19 has obviously made those things worse, and anything that happens between these two countries will affect the rest of the world. So nothing ever in the history of mankind that is documented has affected the globe as much as this before. And as Raj said, it started with the virus started in Wuhan, and then the first result of it was the personal isolation or the lockdown, or how we call it social distancing or physical distancing. This thing, the prolonged isolation and lockdown and closing down of borders and so on has basically started. It was basically the first bullets that was shot to paralyze the global economies. So let's look at certain sectors that have been affected, because almost everything has been affected. And let's start with governments, for example. Every government, without an exception, except the US, and I'll tell you why in a minute, revenues are down. And for Bahrain, our revenues mainly come from what little oil we have, which is about 300,000 barrels. 150,000 is ours, and the other 150 comes to us from Aramco. As Raj said, the decline in demand and the crash in oil did not help. So our other revenues, VAT, taxes on tourism and F&B and entertainment and so on, almost non-existent. Customs fees are also down. Labor, LMRA fees are down. Commercial registrations are down, etc., etc. Every source of revenue for the government has been drastically curtailed. While at the same time, expenses have gone up because governments needed to come to the rescue, not just Bahrain, but globally. Not just to let alone forget making the economies grow. Governments are struggling just to keep people alive, just to keep things surviving. The result of that is an immense increase in public debt, almost across the board. So we left 2019, we left a very difficult 2019 for Bahrain and for the region, and to add scrub salt in the wound, COVID comes in. So public debt for the region and for Bahrain is going up, and it will continue to go up. In fact, globally, public debt has been the highest it's been since World War II. Other sectors of the economy, every sector has almost been affected drastically, except obviously food and beverage, as a result of the keeping those places open, and the initial attack of people stocking down or stocking up on items, be it rice and water and butter and milk and whatever, that actually stimulated those economies. But we are looking at increased bankruptcies, and I'm not sure that the court systems are even ready for it in Bahrain or even the region. We're looking at a drastic increase in defaults. We're looking at unemployment, if not a drastic increase in unemployment, definitely a freeze in hiring by most companies and banks in particular. Spending, individual spending and sentiments are down. Obviously, that doesn't help the economy whatsoever. So nearly every sector has been hit very, very hard by COVID-19. And as a result, one of the most vibrant sectors that this country has relied on, real estate, be it the rental market, be it the resale market, be it the contracting and the construction sector, has really, really taken a very, very big hit. So asset values have also come down drastically, and they will come down drastically. You know, another thing that is going to surface and will linger for a long time, even after a recovery, an economic recovery comes in, is the health system, or the health of people in general. According to Harvard, the adverse health effects of stress and loneliness alone are almost equal to those of excessive alcohol drinking or even smoking. Imagine that. And I alluded earlier to the issue we have with older people, but loneliness and depression is not, we think of only elderly people, but it has hit younger generation between the ages of 14 to 21 very, very hard, because their lifestyle has been drastically changed. So that's something that we're going to have to live with. Let me talk about the banking system, my own world. Look, so far, the central bank has done an outstanding job of relaxing a lot of the parameters that we have to adhere to as banks. And by that, I mean, they have given us a little bit of leeway on what kind and how much provisions we have to take. They've given some relaxation on how we compute some metrics and KPIs. They've given some relaxation on some liquidity measures and so on. But on paper, as of May, banks in Bahrain, they seem to look okay. But I assure you, and I'm not known to sugarcoat things, I assure you that there will be a need for consolidations and quick consolidations, because not all banks in this country are in a position to survive if this thing continues. So for banks, we're looking at tightness of liquidity. We're looking at a noticeable curtailment of stress appetite. In plain English means banks, because they don't have as much liquidity as they did before, and because of the fear of the overall risk environment, they will become much tighter in lending. So all of you who came on this call wanting to have easy loans, I hope I can do it for you, but it's not going to be as easy as you think it's going to be. Our provisions and bad debts will climb noticeably. Net profits will decline. Employment by banks, we are under pressure not to furlough or fire or lay off people. For social, obviously, reasons, we have to do our part. But I assure you, there will be a drastic freezing on hires. This will affect not only people who are looking for jobs, but it will have an adverse effect on the recent graduates who were, to begin with, a challenge for a country like Bahrain. So revenues will drop as well, and cost for banks will continue to climb, mainly because, like governments, we've had to adapt and implement new ways of dealing with this COVID-19. As an example, many banks were shocked when they needed to adapt to having their people working from home. And I'll give you a small example. Most banks did not have enough laptops to provide to 50% of their people working from home. The market in Bahrain did not have enough laptops for the banks to buy. So imagine the smallest detail, and then you go from there. Security, having VPNs, having even the logistics, the backbone, the infrastructure of managing people who are working or trying to work from home. So banks also are having a very, very tough time on these things. Now, the title of this talk of ours tonight was, the term post-COVID was used. Guys, I don't know when post-COVID is going to happen, and I don't think anybody will, but best estimates is maybe a year to 18 months at best that we can possibly lift our heads and say, okay, this thing is over, mainly because maybe some vaccines or treatments or antibodies will have been invented by then. But we probably should, instead of saying post-COVID, we should say during COVID, what will Bahrain economy look like once we open up more aggressively? I think I've discussed with you a lot of the sectors that will and what they would look like once we open up. But the government will have to continue to take on a much bigger part of intervention and leadership. Some programs will take a backseat in favor of programs of places like Tamkeen having to come up with just small monthly payments just to help small companies keep the lights on. And I don't know if that's going to work or not. So we're going to see a lot of bankruptcies, unfortunately. Banks, I've already talked about what they're going to look like. But education will change as well. I think we'll see a different modes of education. Now, every cloud has a silver lining. Every crisis has brought with it an opportunity. And I'll give you an example of my own bank. I have a crisis management team in the bank that we started to meet on a daily basis when the COVID hit hard and we began to work from home. So what we decided to do immediately is use this as an opportunity to accelerate in providing the services that our customers need in order to help them not having to leave their homes and go to the branches and mix with people and touch papers and so on and so forth. And we've made quite a few advances where many of the services that historically customers have had to go to our branches for, now they can do it either through the mobile or they can do it through many of the kiosks that we have. We've even upgraded the ability of your typical ATM machine to do more to help people not have to go to the branches. So from that, we accelerated our digitization campaign. You will see a lot more e-payments in Bahrain, whether it's paying for goods, services, petrol, gasoline, or in the way that people transfer money inside or outside of Bahrain. So I think you'll see less cash circulation in the system. You will see a lot more startup companies having to do with deliveries. Talabat started it, Carriage started it, but I think you'll see a lot more startups because now people are ordering medications, they're ordering all kinds of things through mobile. So e-commerce in Bahrain, which is dismal, we have no e-commerce to speak of. We will have to accelerate e-commerce, and that takes investment, and that takes a shift in culture on the part of not just the consumers, but businesses themselves. I assure you, if you log on the website of most larger retailers in Bahrain, it is nowhere near the Amazons or the Alibabas of the world. They're still very, very clunky, and they have people in the background having to call you back, and they have things on there that they're out of stock. But so we still have to really up the game on e-commerce. Travel and tourism will shift drastically. I think you'll see a lot more people using online sites rather than visit travel agents. Financial services we talked about. Real estate. In the United States, people are going a lot less frequently to look at homes, but they are looking at virtual tours from their laptops that are being offered by real estate agents. Car dealerships are doing the same. You'll do virtual tests, you'll read the reviews on the car because you don't want to go mix and sit in a small closed environment of that car and touch stuff not knowing who was there before you 10 minutes before. The health system in Bahrain is already changing and will continue to change. As an example, I think you now see a lot of people hesitant to go to the hospital for the most mundane, a toothache, an eye infection, a stomach ache, because they're afraid of going into a virus or what seemingly a virus-infested environment. So we're having some hospitals in Bahrain offer digital or virtual consultations, and to even more severe cases, cancer cases, God forbid, heart conditions, and so on and so forth. So I think the health system will change. Food and beverage. Even if we assume that places reopen and restaurants open to walk-in traffic, a restaurant that used to take 100 patrons or 100 tables will now be forced to take only 40 or 50 tables. Can this restaurant survive on the volume of 40 or 50 tables, knowing that they'll have to spend a lot more money on sanitation, distancing, possibly acrylic, parts between the tables, a lot more cleanliness on the back in the kitchen, and so on and so forth. So the volume of fewer people, can they survive? So they may have to retrofit their kitchens in order to be able to cater for a lot more takeaways through all these startup deliveries and so on and so forth. I think what will flourish after this, and not just in Bahrain, but IT infrastructure in addition to these startups. I think the requirements for IT infrastructure in order for us to be able to connect all this stuff in the background of these virtual services is going to have to deliver. And I don't know if we have enough capacity to be able to meet all this demand. So we'll have to step up. Telecoms will have to step up because there'll be the need for incredibly bigger bandwidth at all levels, especially when we get the e-commerce up and running. The postal service and the logistics services in Bahrain will have to also step up quite a bit. If you're going to have an e-commerce and deliveries of almost everything, you cannot do this in the current way we're doing it. You'll have to improve the addressing system of homes and residences and businesses. The postal service will have to upgrade its service to become more competitive with the Aramix. Aramix is already inundated and they have a huge backlogs. Aramix or TNT or DHL, what used to take 4 days now takes 4 weeks. So I think it's an opportunity for the postal services in Bahrain to rise up. I think we with all the challenges that we have, we are lucky in the fact that our government will always jump in with aid as much as they possibly can. We're also blessed to have incredibly close neighbors and allies who genuinely consider us in the same voice and the same efforts that they consider their own people. So I think that works well for us. And to the pleasant surprise of many, every time Bahrain went into the global markets to raise capital, despite the challenges, despite the deficit that we face, our issues of bonds and sukuks are always oversubscribed 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 times. More so, I think, than Oman, for example. Oman is, they often compare us to Oman, but I think we will come out much stronger out of this thing than Oman would for many, many reasons, not the least of which is our allies and the fact that we've gone through 2011 challenges and so on. I don't know if I've given you anything that you don't already know, but from my perspective, I think it's just a dialogue. I don't want to keep talking tonight. I'm more than happy to have a Q&A or hear to the people who are much smarter than me in the group about what they think. Raj, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Hassan. I think it was really interesting. I mean, yes, what you said, perhaps a lot of us know a lot of that, but it was very well put in a very comprehensive manner. So it obviously gives us a good insight. We have asked people to give some questions. Madhavan, do you have any questions that you have received from the participants?
I do have, and then maybe we'll open the floor depending on.
Yeah. So what I suggest is you read out the questions that perhaps Hassan can answer those questions, and then we will take it to the next step.
I'll do my best.
Yeah. The first question is from Mr. Harish Gopinath, who's a chartered accountant who has been here for several years. He's also a board member. His question is, SMEs and startups are significantly impacted due to the current situation. Tamkeen and the liquidity support scheme has helped substantially. The local banks in Bahrain have been very cautious lending to local SMEs and startups. Going forward, this sector will need to be stimulated to increase employment and improve the economy. What kind of, are the banks going to be more flexible in future for financing this sector?
You know, the SME question comes up, and it has been coming up for the last couple of years in Bahrain. And we reached a peak in 2019 of a lot of calls on banks and the government to help the SME sector. You know, historically, most small businesses don't survive for the first 1 or 2 years when they start. So you add to that a complete shutdown of the economy, and I think it's a death sentence, unfortunately. You know, with banks are damned if they do and damned if they don't. We are asked to lend and finance and so on. And we go in cycles, and we've gone in cycles, whereas we became aggressive in certain sectors, and unfortunately sometimes things went bad, and after that banks are usually blamed for not having done their due diligence or not having been careful enough because they wasted, you know, depositors' money and shareholders' money. I think I'd like to be optimistic with you and say yes, but I tell you how we've been cooperative during this. I promise you and I assure you, and I know it firsthand, that we have not applied any pressure on any SME in Bahrain during this COVID to repay. I hardly have any officers calling anyone asking for money. My collections department is now the most relaxed one in the whole bank. So at least from that aspect, we're not asking for our money back. We're not canceling any limits. We are restructuring anyone and everyone who asks for it. But the dilemma banks face is when you are approached with a request from a small business or any other business that doesn't meet the criteria on paper, it becomes really difficult to do that, because even your central bank comes back and says, wait a minute, you did this even though it did not meet the following ratios. So even the central bank has criteria on you. I think the SME issue is going to be a challenge all over the world. It will continue a challenge everywhere, and it's not just a banking issue. It's the fact that, you know, most SMEs, when they start, they're started by professionals who are really good in their craft, but may not have done a good job in management or in planning or in having enough sinking fund to carry you over more than 6 months or a year. So there's a whole bunch of combinations that affect the SMEs that I'm more than happy to talk about. But yes, and banks are part of that problem. Now, what adds to this issue now is that your regular Tamkeen program has been suspended, which is something that Islamic banks in particular relied on in funding the SMEs, where we received some certain guarantees and subsidies from Tamkeen, but that has gone by the wayside because Tamkeen now is paying money just to keep the lights on with a lot of these small businesses. I don't know if I answered your question. To the best of my abilities, I try to answer it in a politically correct way.
Thank you very much, sir. Before I go to the next question, I have a comment to make. Sir, your name seems to be drawing crowds from all over the world. I got participants from USA, Canada, Bangalore and Mumbai from India. And, you know, it is something really, we should give the credit to you for for getting these people to join. Thank you very much, sir.
Wow. I think these people I owe money to, and they finally found me. I didn't know it. It's a privilege. It's very humbling. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
Sir, the next question is from Mr. Balasubramaniam, who is another chartered accountant who has been here for more than 20 years. He is also our board member and treasurer. His question is again related to the previous question, but he refers to the travel-related industry. Hotel and restaurants have become, let me use his own words, untouchables to the banks in Bahrain. When do you think they will have solution for their dire working capital requirements? Thank you.
You're talking about travel agencies and
no, hotels and restaurants mainly.
Yeah, look, I've owned a restaurant. My family owns a couple of restaurants back in the 80s in the States, and I intimately know the restaurant business. I think the restaurant business is and you know better than me as an accountant. You see the number. I think it's a very risky sector because it's difficult to make. It's very challenging. You know, the food costs, the labor costs, and all these things, and the competition, and so on and so forth. So, you know, I go back to a comment I made earlier where banks have done. I mean, my own bank has a tremendous exposure to restaurants in Bahrain, and I have it in my portfolio right now. The sad part is many of these have become non-viable or non-performing. So we've had to take provisions on these things. When this happens, unfortunately, usually even the good ones get painted with the same paintbrush. That is, it's a risky industry and so on. Not all restaurants. I assure you, we look at we still do finance some restaurants, but you have to demonstrate viability through the numbers. You have to demonstrate proper sales because your banks are often confused with having to lend kind of like charity organizations. End of the day, when we sit in front of shareholders come March, we really get grilled on anything that goes south in these banks. So it really has to do with properly assessing the financial viability of a certain sector. And honestly, it's as simple as that.
Thank you, sir. Before I go to the next question, from Mr. Farid Badr, before we started the session, Raj asked Mr. Hassan a question about how many people work in the office, how many people work from home. That reminds me of a joke. During normal times, a minister was visiting one of the factories, and he asked the general manager of the company, how many people work here? He said, sir, about 50%. And may I request Reem to unmute Mr. Farid Badr. He had a question.
Yeah, I see what you mean about the.
So, sorry, sir, you were saying something?
Good evening.
Hello, Farid.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and great to listen to my friend and my colleague Hassan, great friend. It's always a pleasure listening to you and learning from you. I have two things, one comment, one question. One comment is that you've mentioned that a lot of people will go bankrupt because of this COVID-19. Those people who will go bankrupt, the reasons differ. Some of them because of the lockdown. So it is not their fault that they are in this business so what I feel there should be an organization to stand with these people and try to help them not to go into that route of bankruptcy. We have BCCI, they have money, Tamkeen, and other things. There should be some kind of a mechanism to stand with these companies. This is one thing. The other thing is you are sitting on the Bursa, and congratulate you for the appointment. I think renewing the appointment. How can this Bursa help SMEs to escalate, to accelerate? A lot of money is spent on the startups, and they need they go IPO, and that's how we see growth in the startups. We don't see this in Bahrain. If you can comment on that, please. Thank you very much.
I'll take the last question, the second one first, Farid. First of all, it's great to see you, sir, always. But I'll take the second one, but because I want to talk about the bankruptcies in more details, because it's near and dear to my heart as well. The stock exchange here, we are, I tell you, we are dying to have more listings in Bahrain. The board even came up with a program to encourage family businesses to do a closed listings in the boards, if for anything, to instill in place proper governance so that when the next generations take over, there's no problems in succession and continuity and so on and so forth. But the issue you have, the issue we have in Bahrain is the investor appetite for IPOs has been really, really weak in the last 5 to 6 years. I would love to see more investors coming in and taking a chance on these small businesses. I would love to see, the other problem in Bahrain, we only have one local firm that takes care of these things, which is Seco, great company. But I think we to your point, I think we do need, maybe in conjunction with Tamkeen, and I promise you I'll bring it up in the next Tamkeen board meeting, is that possibly come up with a program a low-cost program to at least help some of these companies go public, in not only preparing the red herrings and the brochures, and maybe even marketing them, or maybe even bringing in the network of angel investors in some way. So I hear you loud and clear. I think we need it. Let me go back to the bankruptcy issue. By the way, the problem we have in the Middle East is the word bankruptcy is usually synonymous with somebody going broke and shutting down. I think we need to work hard to communicate better on the definition of what a bankruptcy is. A bankruptcy should be a means of protection for the company or the debtor from the banks and other lenders or creditors. So much so that it should be completely illegal for any lender or a bank, once a company files bankruptcy, hires a lawyer to file bankruptcy, an announcement is made, this puts an absolute brakes on anybody asking that company to pay back anything. It should be a chance to give the company a breathing room to reorganize itself. To reorganize, so it should stay on the books of the banks. The central bank should do whatever it takes to exempt the bank from having to take provisions on companies in bankruptcy. So when I meant about bankruptcy, Fareed, I meant is that the true definition of bankruptcy is that it's an activity of reorganization. Now, the challenge we have in Bahrain is we're new to this. The courts are not ready for it. Judges are not ready for it. Lawyers are not ready for it. We don't have a bankruptcy trustee, yeah? So we need more trained bankruptcy lawyers. We need a bankruptcy trustee. The bankruptcy court should be completely separate from the other legal system, where you have a trustee, and we need to remove the stigma from somebody who's bankrupt as somebody who's just a default, from somebody who's just a defaulter. I hope I've made my point on that one.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Madhavan, I would like to ask a question.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Raj, can I make an announcement?
Yeah.
Before Raj starts, I wanted to request all the members, because if you raise the hands, I may not be able to see you, I or the president, because can't see all of you in one slide, one screen. So I would request you to type your questions, preferably, or if that's not possible, at least say, I have a question, so that we can call you up. Thank you. Raj, sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, no problem. Hassan, just a couple of things. Maybe I have a couple of questions.
Yes, sir.
Now, first of all, we were talking about SMEs. You said a lot of SMEs perhaps would go bankrupt. Now, as we know, SMEs generally form the core of any country's industrial growth. In
Absolutely.
Bahrain, unfortunately, we have this thing. It's all about always albas and BAPCOs, and this is what everybody talks about. The government is always trying to support these, any banks you talk, they are trying to support Albas and Babcos and everything. In doing this, I think the SMEs get lost
Yes.
in the crowd.
Yes.
So as it is, they are a pretty vulnerable lot, and this whole thing doesn't help us anymore. So what are your views as to how to rectify the situation? That's question number one. The second thing, perhaps a lot of us are facing today, contractors more so than anybody else, is there are projects. Today, every project that we take requires performance bond and advance bonds. When we go to any bank, every bank refuses to give performance bonds and advance bond because they say it's very risky. Now, this is the catch-22 situation for contractors. We have a project, we can't get the project until we provide those bonds, and there are no way that we can get bonds. In the market recently, insurance companies came up as an alternative. All of us started running to insurance companies. Their percentages are very high, where we pay perhaps 1.25% to a bank. This insurance companies charges around 4%. If you have a project which is multi-million dinar project, it takes away everything that is there. So it's a very, very difficult situation, a catch-22 situation. What would you recommend is the solution to this?
Look, there's a lot of questions in your question. The most direct one is what we call in the bank is risk appetite, and it has to do with the bank's own appetite of taking on additional risks. And I'll tell you from inside a bank, if a bank is plagued with a high percentage of historically non-performing assets and so on and so forth, that alone will skew the decision-making process for that bank to take on more risks. And I don't mince my words. I'll tell it to you like it is, Raj. Usually banks, when they refuse or they don't want to finance something, it's usually as a result of something that had happened previously, which one or two bad apples have ruined the whole apple cart. But I don't think I am big enough to answer this question for you. I think if the COVID-19 is not a stimulus enough for the central bank, Tamkeen, BCCI, and the banks to get together in here and come up with some sort of a mechanism, i.e., what we call like an SBA program in the US, a PPP program like they have in the US. I don't think this problem is going to go away soon, and it will not be resolved by each bank trying to do their own thing. I really think we need a collective effort on all parts. And I alluded back to the government having to interfere and continue to show a lot of leadership in encouraging these things, because banks are in an also catch-22 situation. Bank says, okay, I've given, but it defaulted. Now, do I give again? What happens if it gets defaulted? The central bank will slap a provisions on me, and they will revolt, and they will actually scold me for not. We get scolded by the central bank for not having done our homework or not having done our due diligence. So we're going in a vicious circle. I think we need a mechanism whereas you have public-private cooperation, but you need the government through Tamkeen in a drastically different way to come up with a program. And I think the BCCI has to play a bigger part. Anybody on the BCCI, from the BCCI on? I mean, I have respect for Mr. Nas and Mohammed Kohaji and everybody. I think BCCI probably should, the big guys, they got the money, they've got the infrastructure, they got the expertise, and they got the connections, and they got the banking relationships. I think the BCCI needs to show more focus onto the small business sector. I really do. And maybe a higher cry from the BCCI to bring in all the parties together. So at least banks who are reluctant are saying, look, we will subsidize you up to a certain X here's a pilot program, let's run with it and see what happens. So we need to do a pilot program through some cooperative effort. I think that's the best thing I can think of, Raj.
Well, thank you. I just have another small question, and then of course I will leave it to others. Bahrain has been promoting and this I talk on behalf of foreign investors here specifically. Bahrain is promoting itself as a destination for investment, foreign investment. And then when you see a situation like this comes, the government is always giving more support to companies owned by Bahrainis or where it is 51% Bahraini ownership. Recently, yes, there has been some support from the government. We appreciate that. Tamkeen has given certain support in such situations. Bahrain, the government has also given, but that is not enough. We find that there are perhaps two ways they weigh everything. If it's a Bahraini company, they get more preference, for example. And if it's a expat company, there isn't that much response. Now, on one end, you're inviting us to come and invest. We have invested millions and millions. And when we are in difficulty, you exclude us. What is your take on that?
I think that's above my pay grade, Raj. You're putting me on the spot here. You know, I cannot speak on behalf of our host government.
No, I understand. I also.
But I hear you. Bahrain needs more foreign investments. We really do. Our economy is such that we need people to bring in their money, to bring in their capital, and so on. And we've adjusted some laws recently in order to do that. So I couldn't agree with you more. I think maybe a little bit more support because look, because when you come here, you're committed. I mean, you've been here 100 years. My God, you and a lot of the esteemed businesses. You don't look it, but a lot of the esteemed gentlemen on this call. You've got families that have been here 50, 60, 80 years, 90 years. So, and they are as loyal to this country as anyone, me included. I love this place. My loyalty to this place is it outweighs my loyalty to Jordan, my birthplace. It really does. I have more affinity to this place. So I understand what you're saying. I cannot disagree with you, but you'll have to forgive me that I cannot talk on behalf of the government.
No, I understand. I just wanted to share a sentiment. That's all.
And I
appreciate what Bahrain is doing.
Yeah, of course.
Madhavan.
There is a question from Mr. Unnikrishnan. He's running an audit firm here. And his question is, can we look at solutions like forming a banking consortium in funding key sectors like SME, tourism, real estate, etc., so that the risk can be shared by the members of the consortium instead of having the burden on one institution?
I think it's a great idea, and I think the fine gentleman is probably articulating in better way than I did that there's a need to form a mechanism or a body, whether it's through public-private partnerships and so on. But as an example, you've seen the liquidity support fund that the government Ministry of Finance came up with. It's unprecedented. It's a start. I think we need something similar to that, where many banks have participated, and the Ministry of Finance has given some solid guarantees with obviously parameters. So I think it's probably a good idea. I'm more than willing to engage. I'm more than willing to bring in some other banks to engage, but I think this will need the support of some regulatory bodies here in Bahrain.
Thank you, sir. May I request so many to wait because I got quite a few questions pending. I saw your hand going up. Please wait. I'll to wait for a few more minutes. Thank you. And may I request Dr. Dhafar? Yeah, may I request Reem to unmute Dr. Dhafar?
Doctor, can you unmute? Yeah, okay.
Dr. Dhafar, yeah. Thank you.
سامعني أخ حسن؟
سامعك سيدي.
Okay حبيبي. أولاً thank you very much for being here with us. I'm proud part of this whole group that you are with us and
My privilege, sir.
lightning.
Sir, sorry to interrupt you. Would you mind talking a little louder?
Okay, can you
Dr.
hear me
Dhafar?
now?
Yeah, no better, yes.
I can do. Anyway, I just want to say that I'm not going to talk about small scale businesses because I have Farid already who started it and Mr. Raj talked about it. But I had attended a presentation 2 days ago. Sheikh Hisham bin Muhammad Al Khalifa will talk about DBD, talk to us. And he told us that there is a lot of money in Bahrain to save those young people if they know where to go. The problem is, where should the people who feel that they're about to bankrupt should go and save themselves? If they cannot go to banks, there are some other sources which are available in Bahrain that they can go to them and they can get help. But I discovered today the latest news that the Prime Minister of the UK, United Kingdom, has announced a drug, a steroid, which is called dexamethasone, which is really, he said that it's going to save us. And a lot of people are using it in the UK and they are being saved. Now, my question is not economics, because I'm an economist, like you, Hassan, and the other guys. But my question is honestly psychological. The psychology that has now affected all the people in the houses. How are these guys going to have enough guts to get out of their houses after the corona is reduced, after the curve turns down, or even after it disappears? Those people are going to lose trust in the environment. So this is going to be damaging for their psychology. I think maybe we need also help from Raj to get us some psychologists to tell us how people are going to react after this corona happens. Because I'm telling you, maybe half of the people are courageous. They will go and they say, we don't care, whatever happens, happens. But old people like me, who are anybody of 60, will be not encouraged at all to go out unless he is 100% sure that things get right, and you never know what's going to get right. Now, after a few months, after 1 year, after 2 years, I don't know. But really, the psychology has to be taken as an important variable. Thank you.
Absolutely, and it's one of the things we talked about earlier, Dr. Dhafar, is the depression and the loneliness and the psychological damage. Not just old people, but even the younger people who are unable to socialize. Look, one of the things that I've done in the bank through our HR is every 2 weeks we hold I don't want to say therapy, but we bring in a psychotherapist or a psychologist to come and address the bank, and we do it virtually, and and we address a certain subject about how to deal with this thing while you're at home, how to deal with family situations, how to and while not too many solid answers are given because this thing is so subjective, the dialogue among people and having a lot of our people just talk it out and talk about their feelings, I find that it's very, very helpful. But I said earlier that the psychological effect will far outlast the economic damage, I think. So you're absolutely spot on, sir.
Thank you, Hassan. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. There's a question from Mr. Subhash Sahu. Any guidelines for ITC and software companies, information technology and software companies? I think he's referring to the financial, going forward, how to get the finance.
I don't know what you mean by guidelines, but I think, look, an IT, if it's a startup, then unfortunately, I think you'll face the same issues of any startup company or a company that doesn't have a proven track record. But I go back to my post this or during this COVID, I think the conventional financing methods through banks no longer valid. They just don't work anymore. You know, banks are running scared. They don't have the money. I think we need to look a lot more towards more angel investors, a lot more towards, I don't want to say private equity because that's a whole different kettle of fish. But we talked about having different bodies and mechanisms with the cooperation of maybe banks and certain bodies in the government to try to come up with a joint partnership with certain parameters to try to support these companies. It has to be something drastic. It has to be something different, because if the old measures that banks used to offer in the good days were not sufficient to fund small businesses or startups, these measures are even more difficult post-COVID because of the heightened risk environment. So I think we go back to the original suggestion of really the government has to interfere, bring people around the table and say, we need to sit in this room, come up with a mechanism so we can do X for X this. And I tell you, the Minister of Finance did this with us for the Liquidity Support Fund. Literally, my guys were working till 11 o'clock at night for 2 months of staying in here, come up with some guidelines. It was an experience. I think we need to go above and beyond that.
Thank you, sir. And there's a question from Mr. Jasim Ishaqi. I'll read it. It's not very long, but it's 2 sentences. Hello, thanks for this very useful session with a very professional and knowledgeable CEO I have ever come across. My question to Mr. Hassan, this crisis pushes you out of your comfort zone. Do you feel confident enough to accept this challenge with a smile?
No. I tell you something. You know, we're humans, and anybody who in this environment tells you is not scared is not telling you the truth. I don't mind sharing personal experiences with you. I have 3 children. They're all in the US. And I woke up this morning at 2 in the morning with the thought of, when am I going to see my children next? And will I get sick and die of this disease without them seeing me? And what if one of them gets sick and I can't reach them and they cannot reach each other? We have these thoughts in our mind, but I tell you something. Every religion has its own philosophies, and I think all religions speak the same thing. So, but I'm going to quote my own, and I'm sure in Christianity and Hinduism and everything, they have an equivalent. We have something out of the Quran that says, "Inna ma'al usri yusra." With every difficulty, eventually a relief comes in. Every cloud has a silver lining. I believe that human beings are incredibly tenacious, and I believe that the amount of energy, money, expertise, science that is being poured into trying to come up with a vaccine or a cure for this is unprecedented. And I think the brain power out there is such that I'm optimistic that something will come up. There will be a lot of collateral damage along the way, a lot. So I have to be optimistic because I have, my employees are depending on me, and if I show any weakness or any fear, believe me, it will reflect on them, and the whole thing will go unraveling. And I, in return, face an issue of who do I turn to when I need to relief? I need to talk. I don't have anybody, people like us. If you lead that organization, it's very difficult to talk about it. It's very difficult to express your feelings. So the answer to your question is, inshallah, we will come out of it. We have to keep smiling. because I believe we as human beings, we don't know enough to realize why this thing is happening. It's happening for a reason. I don't know what it is. You don't know what it is. Nobody knows what it is. But a year or two from now, I'm hoping that we look back and say, wow, look what happened. Remember when the COVID did this, but look at what we've done as a result. I'll give you one example. During one of my calls with my crisis management team, I asked each one of them to send one suggestion to our head of transformation on how each one of them, one suggestion on how each one of them will run their businesses or do things differently as a result of this COVID-19. I have pages worth of things that we could have come up with before, but people didn't. And now all of a sudden this crisis is bringing out the innovation and the creativity in people. Inshallah, we'll come out of it. We have to be optimistic because the alternative is not a good one.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. And there's a comment from Mr. Ishaki saying that totally agree with your comments. And Soman, I've been asking him to hold on for quite some time. Reem, would you mind unmuting Soman, please? Soman is a veteran journalist who has been in Bahrain for time immemorial. And he's also a board member of the Bahrain India Society.
I know him well. Good evening, sir.
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, congratulations on the excellent speech you made.
Thank you,
this was really touching. Really touching.
Thank you.
The head of the task force committee, Prince Salman bin Hamad Al Khalifa, the Crown Prince, they agreed for BD 4.3 billion in the stimulus economic package, and also the last cabinet meeting again BD 177 million. People are asking, these people, they got waiving from the rent, the municipality, the bills and all. 3 months they got, they expect more, another 3 months. So how long this will go on, and what do you think will be the chances?
I think, immense gratitude and respect for His Highness. The amount of leadership that he displayed early on is really inspiring, and we thank him for, despite the difficulties we're having right now, things could have been a lot worse. But I honestly think that maybe maybe the people who did not need the aid maybe should not have taken it. Maybe we should have done our part to not use something that somebody else could have used. But how much longer can we expect? I don't know. I'm going to give you a controversial answer. I don't think the government has enough resources, God help them, to continue to waive this and waive that. And by the way, a lot of the private businesses did the same. I mean, waived rents and so on and so forth. But for us to expect another 3 months of waivers, I think that's pushing it. My personal view.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Where is it going to come from? Where is it going to come from? I don't know. The government doesn't have it, unless the government will have to go back and borrow again in order to support. But maybe we need to be a bit more discerning, a bit more choosing as who avails this subsidy. Is everybody avail it? Maybe not. Maybe if they're going to continue another 3 months, this time it'll be a bit narrower window to people who really need it. And I stress that, people who really need it. The same as the loan repayment exemption for 6 months. I mean, I publicly say that there's a lot of people who remained in their jobs, government workers, for example, a lot, and their salaries are still fine. They're still happening. So they still took advantage of that thing. Okay, the central bank said fine, they did. But should those people have really taken advantage when they needed to pay? What I did in my bank is we obviously complied, but I wanted an interesting exercise. I said to my head of IT, I said, can you give me some information on, is there any of our customers that continued to pay? And I was shocked. A lot of people continued to pay, did not want to take advantage of the program because they didn't need it. So we need more of those people in not taking advantage of the 3-month electricity and water, 3 months rent, and 3 months and so on and so forth. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you. Thank you.
There are two more small questions. Can I take it up?
Sure. Last two
Okay.
questions. Last two questions.
The first is from Mr. Jawad Pasha. He's working for a pharmaceutical company. And his question is about, he just said, what about pharmaceutical industry? I think because of the current scenario, the illness, the importance of the pharmaceutical industry has come to limelight. So do you think some encouragement to the pharmaceutical sector?
Oh, I agree. I know we bank almost every pharmaceutical company in Bahrain, almost all of them. So, and I know they're very important, and I know a lot of the challenges they face in delayed payments and so on when they provide large contracts to certain entities. Yes, I'm a huge believer in supporting it because, I mean, my God, there's never been a time where we need them more. But I also think that he would know better that even the supply chain in that has suffered a little bit because of the demand and the disruption of shipping and so on and so forth. But maybe in Bahrain, one of the industries we can encourage, kind of like Jordan did, a lot of the generic pharmaceutical manufacturing here, maybe a viable thing for us in Bahrain. Maybe we need to think about that. Somebody would talk to Minister Zayani or something.
Another question from Jasim Ishaki. I love this question. Do you see any positive things about the crisis?
Yes, if I didn't make myself clear, I'm sorry, but I'll try it again. Some of the positives that will come out of this one is the acceleration of a digital economy, the acceleration and probably improvement in the business of IT infrastructure, in telecoms. I also think it has opened the eyes of a lot of companies as to how their business model is shaped and how it needs to be changed in order to deal with crises. So there's a lot of learnings that came out of this crisis here. And one huge advantage or lesson is never, ever, ever take anything for granted. Anything is possible. Anything can happen. You wake up one day healthy, you thank you, God, that you made it through another day, because you never know what's going to happen in the next day.
Thank you very much, sir. Raj, we don't have any more questions. So if
I'll
like
just
conclude. Yeah.
Thank you, Madhavan. Hassan, I just have two small points, perhaps before we end. We all agree here, perhaps, that Bahrain has been very proactive and has, with whatever resources it has done a lot for the country, for all the people. Going forward, what is Bahrain going to fall back on in terms of resources? We had our neighbors who used to come and help us before. They themselves are in trouble today. And given the scenario of the oil and what we have, the world industry today, where do you see Bahrain getting resources to go further with all its projects and all that? That's number one. And second, to you personally, banks. They are charging anywhere between 4%, 5% onwards interest rate, while globally interest rates are near zero. Now the Fed is even talking of perhaps negative interest rates like in Switzerland and all that. Why is there such a big disparity between 0% versus 5% and going up to 8% or whatever, depending on each company?
Sure. I'll take the second question first, Raj, with the banks. There is a decoupling between market rates and global market rates and the rates in the Gulf region or the Middle East to be exact. Your typical deposit rate in the West right now is close to zero. You call Chase or Bank of America, you want to open a fixed deposit with $1 million, and then they'll say, we'll give you a whopping 0.5% rate for a year. In Bahrain and in the Gulf in general, because liquidity and the drop in oil prices and liquidity remains a challenge. And, you know, I came out in the press in 2017 and I said liquidity is going to get tight, and I got a lot of flack for it. But nobody called me again when it came reality. I told the truth. I said liquidity is gonna be hurting here. So in Bahrain, it's a small pie, and what banks do is they keep circulating the same customers among themselves onto who pays you the most. So the cost of funds in Bahrain remains high. Therefore, I mean, look, call most banks in Bahrain right now. You'll get rates of, 2.5%. You get rates of 4% from some banks. So the bank if the bank pays you 4% to buy the raw material, and they need to tack on their 2% margin, they'll have to sell it to you at least 6%. This is the only reason why it's happening. Our own central bank, competes with the banks on short-term deposits. And I told the governor, this is why you do. I said, you stop competing with me on my customers, I'll pay lower rates on deposits, because, the central bank pays also good rates.
Yes.
We need to do that in order to also prop up the dinar and make sure that no talks of depegging are there. But it has to do with the fact that the cost of funds for the bank in Bahrain and in the whole region remains high. Thus, the cost of lending is high. It's really as simple as that. Your first question, what is Bahrain going to fall back on? I think we are the only country in the Gulf that relies the least on oil prices. So this country has started diversification some time back. But I also think that we missed a couple of boats during the good times. Had we captured those opportunities, had we had more sense of urgency, I think probably it would have been a little bit easier right now. We've always called for Bahrain to utilize the biggest resource it has, which is the local talent. Unlike any country in the Gulf, we have more educated Bahrainis. They're bilingual. Some of them are trilingual. So let's compete with Singapore and Manila and even Chennai and on a lot of the services, the service industry, be it call centers, be it making Bahrain an SPV hub, revamping the offshore banking model in Bahrain to compete with the likes of Jersey and all these things. The FDI, the DIFC has done a phenomenal job of basically bringing in the UK law and installing it in the DIFC and putting the letter D in front of the FSA. So now they have the DFSA. So the level of confidence in the DIFC law, commercial law, is the same as it is in the UK, which is not a small feat. I think we needed to have done that in Bahrain earlier, but it's not too late to do that. So we need to become relentless and unwavering about very clear commercial laws for the protection of foreign investors. They come in. Our legal system has to be such. We have the BCDR, which in my mind is really underutilized and underpublicized. We need to publicize it more. So we need to do things that we don't have land, we don't have energy. So, and by the way, manufacturing doesn't create a lot of jobs when you think about it. So you need to look at those sectors that can utilize the resources of the country. I think we need to work on becoming much more of a medical tourism hub, educational tourism with more world-class universities, more service centers, and things like that. It's going to take a while. And to do all that, also the country has to take another hard look at our education system. And I'm not talking about the universities. I'm talking about way when we start, we need more technology education. We need more coding in Bahrain. We need less classic degrees because the world is shifting and the need for those things is not there anymore. Other than that, I'm not smart enough to come up with anything more.
Mr. Hassan, Chairman, if you permit me, can I take 1 more minute? There's another comment and a small question from Jasim. Can I take it?
Sure.
The last one.
Yeah, the last one. The comment is, and I'm learning, and that's true, never take advantage of the situation. And the question is actually, as an advice, please, what should I sacrifice first in my business because of this crisis? If things get worse, God forbid. And by the way, I'm not pessimistic.
Wow, you put me on the spot. First of all, you have to forgive me. I don't know what the nature of your business is. So I don't know what is it that you need to sacrifice. But I tell you one thing. People during financial crises, the first thing they tend to do is they sacrifice the people. They say, oh, I'll cut half the staff. And by that, sometimes you cut some of the good people. And when you recover, and inshallah we all recover, you'll find that you need to rehire those people. So can you rehire those people or not? But I'll give it to you in a different way. I think you need to look at areas where you need to invest more in those areas that you feel will actually add economic value to your business rather than just cut. The first thing we do is cut. But what is it that I need to invest more into that will actually help me survive or come out of this thing stronger? Again, the caveat I have is I don't know what the nature of your business is. I don't know what the number of employees and so on and so forth. So I'm sorry, that's the best answer I can give you.
I think that concludes the questions. And Raj, I think I leave it to you how to. Yeah.
No, I would just like to thank Hassan for a wonderful session. We haven't had a question answer session which actually went longer than the main talk. So just that goes to show how interested people were and how good your answers were to keep them engaged and occupied.
Thank you.
Hassan, it's always a pleasure having you. It's not the first time I have interacted with you. I mean, professionally, I've listened to a lot of your talks. It's always enlightening.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much once again.
Thank you.
Stay safe and our best wishes to your mother that she stays safe while she's here.
Thank you.
Okay.
Raj, thank you and the esteemed board of the Bahrain India Business Society. I'm humbled and privileged by the attendance and the questions and the interactions. I've learned a lot, and I wish you all the best. And please, you also be safe. And inshallah, we will be able to meet in person one of these days.
Hopefully, very soon.
God bless. God bless.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for joining in. Everybody who has logged in, members and guests, thank you very much. Have a pleasant evening.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.